Hey everyone, welcome back. So, I want you to imagine 3 really common scenarios for a second.
Okay, I'm listening.
You're traveling for work, right? And you pull into this cheap roadside motel just to get a few hours of sleep. Or you're sitting on your couch looking at your phone and you accept a follow request on social media from someone you vaguely know.
Right, totally normal stuff.
Exactly. Or maybe, you are packing up your car, desperate to seek out some peace and quiet on a solo camping trip. They all seem completely mundane. They are things you've probably done dozens of times. But here is the question we are asking today. At what exact moment do you realize you are no longer the main character in your own life, but the prey in someone else's?
Oh man, that is a terrifying shift in perspective. It happens like the split second you realize the environment you thought you controlled is actually controlling you.
Yeah, and that is exactly what we're unpacking in this deep dive. But really quickly, before we jump into the structure of today's show, if you are enjoying this audio overview on YouTube, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel right now. It really helps us out.
It really does.
So today our mission is to look at a collection of 3 chilling, allegedly true survival accounts originally curated by Mr. Night Mer. And we aren't just telling these scary stories today. We are going to discuss the events, provide theories on the predator's motives, analyze the psychology of it all, verify if we think these are real or fake, and, give our own personal opinions.
And when you look closely at these 3 source materials, they all share this one horrifying common denominator, which is the calculated exploitation of isolation.
Right. So our first account takes us to this dying town in northern Pennsylvania. We have this commercial refrigeration repairman. He's working these brutal long hours.
Yeah, and his company sticks him in literally the only place with a vacancy. It's a single-floor motel on the edge of town where, all the room doors face the parking lot.
Which is instantly sketchy.
Oh, absolutely. Just looking at the architecture of that environment, it is incredibly vulnerable. I mean, motels like that were designed in the mid-century for driving convenience, not for security.
Right. Anybody can just pull a vehicle right up to your point of entry and watch you.
Exactly. And the isolation of this specific location is palpable. The town is full of empty buildings. The motel office smells like old coffee and bleach. And then you have the desk clerk.
Oh yeah, the desk clerk. She's this woman in her 60s who gives him a really casual but highly specific warning. She basically says, do not open your door at night unless it's her or the owner.
Right, and she says, whatever you hear outside, do not get involved. She blames it on, quote unquote, drifters.
Which feels like a massive red flag. Like if I hear that at check-in, I am turning around and sleeping in my car. Make sure to like and subscribe if you would also just sleep in your car in that situation. But anyway, he's exhausted, so he brushes it off and goes to his room. Let's look at how this systematically escalates because it is so methodical.
It really is. On night 1, he comes back from grabbing fast food and notices a man sitting motionless in a dark green pickup truck in the lot.
The lights are off, the engine is running, and the guy doesn't even turn his head to look at him right.
Right. And later that night, the auditory assault begins. Heavy footsteps pacing back and forth outside his door. They stop, they wait, they pace again. Then, 2 identical, sharp knocks.
But when he rushes to look through the peephole, there is absolutely no one there.
Right.
And I'm just thinking, why would someone looking to rob a room knock and then hide?
Because it isn't a robbery. That behavior is a predatory test. They are gathering intelligence.
Wait, what do you mean by intelligence, like checking if he's awake?
Exactly. By knocking and hiding, they are checking multiple variables. Are you a deep sleeper? Do you turn on the lights before checking the door? Do you call out? Or are you reckless enough to just swing the door wide open in the dark?
Wow. They are mapping his responsiveness.
Yes. They want to know exactly how he reacts to a stimulus.
So he goes back to bed, but something tells him to check the peephole one last time. And this detail, it made my stomach drop. When he looks through the glass, he realizes he can only see the top of a baseball cap and a shoulder.
Because someone is crouched low, pressed flat against the door, right under the peephole, just waiting.
Which is horrifying.
It really is, and it shows they understand the mechanics of that specific door. A peephole has a limited field of vision, usually a fisheye lens that distorts the bottom edges.
So crouching below that sight line means they've tested this exact maneuver before.
Right. They know exactly where the blind spots are.
He actually calls the police and they do a sweep, but they find nothing. So he makes the fateful decision to stay for night 2.
A terrible idea in hindsight.
Truly. So he's lying in bed, fully awake, pretending to be asleep. The green truck is back in the lot. He hears slow steps approaching, a soft tap on his window, and then the sound of a fingernail slowly dragging down the glass.
And then it shifts. He hears someone use a key or some kind of specialized tool to open the completely empty room right next door to his.
Which is just no.
He's listening through the shared wall, literally holding his breath, and suddenly he hears one violently hard hit against the headboard from the other side.
Okay, so let's analyze this, because burglars operate on the principle of minimal disturbance, right? They want to get in, grab high-value items, and get out silently.
Exactly. Tapping on glass, dragging fingernails, breaching an adjacent room to physically strike the shared wall, that is straight-up psychological warfare.
The only analogy that makes sense to me is the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. Think about the scene where the game warden explains how the raptors were testing the electric fences for weaknesses.
Oh, I love that analogy. That perfectly describes what's happening here.
Right. They weren't just throwing themselves blindly at the perimeter, they were systematically probing for a failing point. If this was just some standard crime of opportunity, why perform an elaborate hours-long theater?
Because they are mapping the structural integrity of the room, yes, but more importantly, the psychological integrity of the victim inside.
Which brings us to the police officer's theory later on.
Yes. The officer later admitted there had been 2 other similar incidents in the past 6 months, specifically targeting men staying alone for work at that exact motel.
So this changes our entire theory of the crime. This was an organized hunting ground.
Absolutely. The predators were likely observing out-of-town workers from job sites, following them back to this specific motel, and waiting until they were entirely isolated. They weren't looking for wallets. They were looking for bodies.
That is so dark. And we have to talk about how we verify these accounts, because it is really easy to dismiss a story about someone hearing noises in a cheap motel. Like, oh, it was just the wind or a drunk guy.
Right, people write it off all the time.
But it is my personal opinion that this account is undeniably real because of the physical evidence he finds when he is frantically packing up his bags to flee the next morning.
The note.
He drops his phone charger, reaches under the bed, and pulls out a torn square piece of local newspaper. Written in ink on the back is his room number, his truck's license plate, and the word pen.
The implications of that piece of paper are just staggering.
It proves the room was compromised before he ever walked through the door. They had physical access to his room to plant that note under the bed. The entire environment was a pre-planned trap.
The desk clerk's weird behavior, the warnings not to look outside, the empty room next door, it was all staged to keep him compliant and isolated.
Wow. Guys, please remember to hit subscribe if that makes you never want to stay in a motel again, because I am right there with you.
It definitely makes you rethink your travel plans.
Yeah.
At the motel, the victim realized a physical lock was completely useless once the environment itself was compromised by a coordinated group. A deadbolt is just theater if the predators hold the master key.
That is such a good point.
But I think we make an even more dangerous mistake when we assume an invisible digital barrier offers us any real protection.
Which brings us perfectly to our second source account. We are pivoting from the physical surveillance of a motel parking lot to the intimate digital surveillance of a smartphone screen.
This is a really modern kind of terror.
It really is. This takes place late last year, around October 2025. A woman matches with a military man named Killian on Tinder. They text heavily, but they never actually go on a date.
Yet, over just a few weeks of messaging, he becomes terrifyingly possessive.
Yeah, he tells her outright, if I can't have you, no one can, and if you block me, I'll kill you.
Which is immediate grounds for a restraining order. But he eventually unfriends her on Snapchat, weaponizing the silence, only to pop back up weeks later with a new friend request.
And this is where I was practically yelling at the source text as I read it. Out of sheer terror, she accepts his new Snapchat request.
Which sounds crazy to a lot of people, but there's a reason for it.
Right. Her logic is that she doesn't want to quote-unquote upset him by rejecting it, and she wants to be able to keep tabs on his location.
It is completely understandable human logic when you are in a pure panic state, but it is a tragic miscalculation.
Yeah, I push back on that logic so hard.
Well, it's the instinct of the primate brain. Evolution wired us to keep predators in our direct line of sight. Our nervous system tells us that visibility equals control. If I can see the tiger can't sneak up on me.
But the digital world doesn't work like the jungle. Accepting that request is like keeping a live bomb in your pocket just so you can watch the digital timer tick down.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
You think keeping him on your app means you're watching the tiger, but you aren't. You are effectively handing the tiger a GPS tracker and fastening it to your own neck.
By letting him back into her digital sphere, she inadvertently handed him the very tools he needed to hunt her in the physical world.
Even though she adamantly refused to turn on her Snapchat map, right? She believed that protected her location.
She did. But predators of this caliber don't require a glowing dot on a map to find you.
I need you to explain how that works and provide a theory here, because she never gave him her home address. Yet, fast forward to a Thursday night. She gets a ride home from a friend and is dropped off in her alleyway at 1 a.m.
And there he is.
Killian is standing in the dark, waiting for her. He ambushes her, violently slams her head into a brick wall, and begins choking her to the point where she genuinely believes her life is ending. How did he know exactly where she would be?
Well, even with location sharing disabled, digital metadata is a breadcrumb trail.
What kind of metadata?
If she sent him a casual photo of her morning coffee, the AXIF data embedded in that image file can contain exact longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates.
Wait, really? Just from a picture of coffee?
Oh, yeah. Or he could have utilized mutual friends' public locations, triangulated her routine based on background landmarks in her posts, or used casual conversation details to physically tail her from her workplace.
That is terrifying.
It is. Once you grant someone digital proximity, your physical footprint becomes entirely traceable.
The psychological aspect of the assault is what chills me the most, though. She describes looking up into his eyes while his hands are around her throat, expecting to see blinding rage.
But she doesn't.
No. Instead, she notes that his eyes were completely blank. There was zero emotion.
And that emotional blankness is the defining hallmark of instrumental violence.
Instrumental violence. Expand on that.
Sure. We often confuse crimes of passion with this kind of behavior because of his possessive text messages. But reactive violence, a crime of passion, is chaotic, angry, and emotional.
So what is instrumental violence?
Instrumental violence is a cold, calculated exercise of power to achieve a goal. He wasn't in a rage. He was performing a task. He viewed her not as a human being causing him emotional distress, but as an object he needed to dismantle.
And if you guys watching are finding this analysis fascinating, please remember to hit that subscribe button, because the detail that validates this terrifying reality for me, the part where I had to put the text down and take a breath, was the reason the assault ended.
It's unbelievable.
She is on the pavement, her vision is fading, she is making peace with death and thinking about her deceased dog, and suddenly, he just stops. He lets go of her throat, stands up, looks at his watch, and says, "I have to go, the last bus is leaving in 3 minutes."
It is a staggering display of psychopathic compartmentalization.
Exactly. In my opinion, that is why this account is undeniably real. You cannot invent that level of bizarre, chilling realism.
Right, you just can't.
A mundane public transit schedule is what saved her life. Not a heroic neighbor hearing the struggle, not a passing police cruiser, a city bus timetable.
Attempted murder was literally just an errand on his evening to-do list, and he simply didn't want to pay the surge pricing for an Uber ride home.
And we have to recognize that the terror doesn't neatly resolve just because he caught that bus. Her vocal cords were so severely damaged from the strangulation that she physically couldn't speak to the 911 operator when she finally reached her phone.
Yeah, and today she lives with a police-issued panic button and a GPS tracker because Killian's associate has now taken over, stalking her.
The digital boundary was breached once, and her physical reality is permanently altered.
Exactly.
So if the physical world of a motel is compromised, and the digital world of our phones is essentially a homing beacon for stalkers, the natural human instinct is to run away from all of it.
No phones, no motels, no social media, no people.
Exactly. But that leads us directly into our third source account, and perhaps the most primal vulnerability of all.
If the second account was about a predator finding exactly where you live, this one is about deliberately going where absolutely no one can find you and realizing too late that you aren't alone.
We're looking at Mike. He's an experienced outdoorsman who is severely burnt out and wants to disconnect with a solo camping trip deep in the Smoky Mountains.
Sounds peaceful enough.
You'd think. Before heading into the park, he stops at a small roadside diner. It's completely empty except for an older waitress and a rugged-looking guy sitting a few stools down who keeps staring at him.
Always a bad sign.
Yeah. When Mike makes casual conversation with the waitress and mentions he's heading up the mountain to camp solo, the guy finally speaks. He just looks at Mike and says, "It gets real quiet out there at night."
Now, in the context of normal conversation, that's just small talk. But in the context of predatory behavior, that is a scout identifying a mark.
Really? A scout?
Yes. Predators operating in vast wilderness areas often utilize choke points, the last gas station, the final diner, the trailhead parking lot, to observe and identify solitary, vulnerable targets before they disappear into the canopy.
And that theory holds up because later that night, Mike is set up in a highly remote clearing. He has his fire going, he's relaxing, and suddenly he hears heavy footsteps in the brush.
Someone followed him.
Exactly. A man is standing about 40 feet away, lingering just outside the edge of the firelight. The man calls out and asks Mike if he's out there alone.
The worst question you could possibly hear out there.
Mike's stomach instantly drops. He senses the danger, and he lies. He shouts back that his friends are hiking up the trail and meeting him any minute.
Which makes sense. Look at the sheer asymmetry of that encounter. Mike is sitting next to a roaring fire, perfectly illuminated against the pitch black of the forest. The predator is cloaked in complete darkness.
Mike can't see the man's hands, his face, or if he's holding a weapon.
Exactly. Lying about backup is the only psychological defense mechanism Mike has access to in that moment.
I kept thinking of it like a high-stakes game of poker, but you're playing against an invisible opponent. You throw out your absolute best bluff like, my friends are coming, I am not an easy target, but you have absolutely no idea what kind of hand the person standing in the shadows is holding.
The predator calls the bluff beautifully. He simply stands there and waits. He doesn't argue, he doesn't approach immediately.
He just stares.
Yeah, he slowly turns to walk into the woods, but stops right before he disappears into the tree line, turning his body back to watch Mike. He is establishing absolute dominance.
The body language says, I know you are lying about your friends, and I want you to know I'm not going anywhere.
Precisely.
Mike is terrified, so he retreats into his tent, zips it up, and waits. Which, when you think about it, a nylon tent might as well be made of tissue paper against a knife.
It offers zero physical protection.
None. And then the auditory horror begins. For hours in the pitch black, Mike listens to footsteps slowly circling his tent.
Oh, that is agonizing.
He hears dry leaves crunching, the steps stop, they wait, they start again. And the detail that will stay with me forever, the footsteps stop right outside his head. Total silence falls.
And then?
He hears the sound of a slow, deliberate human exhale right against the thin nylon fabric next to his ear, just breathing.
Ugh. Let's analyze the neurology of that specific fear.
Yeah, please do.
When you are plunged into absolute darkness, your brain loses its primary sensory input. To compensate, the auditory cortex becomes hypersensitive. Your brain is desperately trying to build a spatial map out of sound waves.
So every little noise is amplified.
Exactly. The predator intuitively knows this. By circling the perimeter for hours and then standing close enough for Mike to hear the moisture in his breath, the predator is weaponizing the silence itself.
It's torture.
It really is. This isn't just intimidation. This is deliberate nervous system torture designed to wear the target down to a state of complete exhaustion.
But the twist is, it wasn't just one predator. When dawn finally breaks and Mike violently bolts from the tent, sprinting for the trail, he hears a massive disturbance in the brush.
He doesn't just hear one person running away, does he?
No, he hears multiple sets of heavy footsteps scattering through the dry leaves. A pack.
Which perfectly validates our choke point scout theory.
The man at the diner.
Right. The man at the diner identified the solitary target, followed him up the mountain, and then called in others.
That is so deeply unsettling.
The circling footsteps that Mike heard fading and returning throughout the night might not have been one person pacing. It was highly likely multiple people taking turns or carefully positioning themselves around the perimeter of the campsite to ensure there was no avenue of escape.
But how do we verify this? Like, it's the woods at night. Our minds play tricks on us. How do we know Mike didn't just suffer a massive panic attack and imagine the rustling leaves and the breathing?
We have to look at the physical evidence left behind, or lack thereof.
Right. We know it's real because of what happens when he goes back. In the broad daylight, accompanied by park rangers, Mike hikes back up the trail to retrieve his expensive camping gear.
And what does he find?
He finds absolutely nothing. His heavy canvas tent, his thick sleeping bag, his cast iron cooking supplies, completely erased from the clearing. The only evidence that he was ever there is the blackened circle of ashes from his campfire.
In my opinion, the complete erasure of that campsite is the most chilling validation possible.
Why is that?
Because if a lone opportunist stumbles upon an abandoned campsite in the woods, They grab the high-value, lightweight items. They take the GPS, the knife, maybe a nice jacket.
Sure, grab and go.
Yeah, they leave the heavy, cumbersome tent and the trash behind.
They certainly don't pack up cast iron pans.
Exactly. To dismantle and erase a campsite so thoroughly that it looks like no human being ever occupied the space. That requires massive physical effort.
And multiple people.
Yes. It requires a group of people, and most importantly, it requires dark intent. They didn't haul all that heavy gear away for profit. They did it to wage psychological war.
They wanted Mike to return with the authorities and find nothing, leaving him to question his own sanity.
Exactly.
It is profoundly terrifying. And hey, if you are still with us and enjoying this analysis, please remember to like and subscribe. It really means a lot. So, synthesizing all of this, we have the Pennsylvania motel trap, the Tinder stalker waiting in the city alleyway, and the silent pack of watchers in the Smoky Mountains.
Right. The overarching lesson we have to take away from all three of these source accounts is that human predators, regardless of whether they operate in rural, urban, or wilderness environments, rely on one vital condition.
Isolation.
Exactly. Isolation. They must separate their target from the safety of the herd.
They need you tucked behind a cheap motel door where no one driving by will hear you scream. They need you to rely on a digital map and a false sense of control instead of your physical instincts.
And they need you deep in the woods where your only defense is a desperate lie about friends who are never coming.
We all go through our lives relying on these incredibly thin barriers to keep the monsters at bay. A flimsy metal deadbolt, a block button on a social media app, a millimeter of nylon fabric pitched in the dirt.
We invest so much faith in these social contracts of safety, assuming everyone plays by the rules.
But those barriers only work against people who agree to the rules. So here is a provocative thought for you to mull over today as you go about your normal routine.
Think about the casual digital footprints you are leaving right now, in the photos you post, or the locations you tag.
Think about the brief, seemingly harmless interactions you have with strangers at gas stations or diners or in the lobby of your apartment building. The next time you find yourself perfectly isolated, enjoying the peace and the quiet, how sure are you that you are the only one listening to it? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you made it this far, you know what to do. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. We will see you next time.